Hello, everyone. Just a quick reminder before we start with today's story. Please press the subscribe button and give a like if you like the story. It means a lot to me and motivates me to keep making more videos. Thank you. The drive to Ravencrest was longer than I remembered. The last time I'd seen the house, I was a child, barely old enough to understand why my father never spoke about it. It had been my great-aunt Evelyn's home, a looming Victorian beast perched at the edge of a thick forest, its iron gates rusted with age and neglect. I hadn't wanted to come back, not ever. But when Evelyn passed, she left the house to me. No explanation, no warning, just a lawyer's crisp voice over the phone telling me that I had inherited the estate with the condition that I live in it for 1 full year before deciding its fate. Selling it would have been my first instinct. I didn't want to uproot Sophie, my 8-year-old daughter, especially not after we had barely begun to heal from Anna's death. But finances were tight. My late wife's medical bills had drained our savings, and the thought of a rent-free year was too tempting to ignore. Sophie sat quietly in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit to her chest, eyes flicking between the trees that lined the long, winding road. The forest pressed close, dark and oppressive, swallowing the last rays of evening light. "Do you remember Aunt Evelyn?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Sophie shook her head. "Not really, just her letters." That wasn't surprising. Evelyn had been a recluse for most of her life. She never married, never had children of her own. But she had written to Sophie frequently. Long, rambling letters filled with old stories about the house, warnings about locked doors, and odd riddles Sophie barely understood. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to those letters. Ravencrest appeared at the end of the road, emerging from the mist like something from an old Gothic novel. The house was massive, its dark wooden exterior weathered but sturdy, the stained glass windows flickering with the glow of the sunset. At the top of the house, a tower jutted up like a skeletal finger, its peak lost in the clouds. A shiver ran down my spine. It was just the wind, I told myself. Just the autumn chill. We pulled up to the front, the tires crunching on the gravel drive. The moment I stepped out of the car, the air felt heavier, like the house was watching, waiting. Sophie climbed out beside me, staring up at the house. "It's big," she whispered. I forced a smile. "It's temporary." But the moment we stepped inside, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. The house smelled of old wood and something faintly floral, like dried roses left too long in the sun. Dust clung to the furniture, but the place wasn't abandoned. It had been lived in, tended to. Evelyn had kept it in pristine condition, right up until the day she died. A grandfather clock stood in the foyer, its hands frozen at midnight. A winding staircase led up to the second floor, where rows of closed doors lined the hallway. Sophie took my hand. "Daddy," she whispered, voice barely audible. "There's someone upstairs." I stiffened, my heart slamming against my ribs. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She didn't answer. She just clutched her rabbit tighter. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to move. "It's just us, Soph. Come on, let's find the bedrooms." But when we walked past the parlor, Sophie froze. There, scattered across the floor, were rose petals, blood red, fresh, and leading toward the staircase. And as I looked up, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs, a woman in black watching us. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. For a long moment, I stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, my breath caught in my throat. The house was silent, too silent. No creaking floors, no settling wood, just Sophie's shallow breathing beside me and the distant tick of the grandfather clock, its hands unmoving. I forced myself to swallow the rising fear. It had to be my imagination, the stress of the move, the exhaustion, the weight of grief pressing down on me. That's all it was. Still, I didn't take Sophie upstairs right away. Instead, I turned to the study, hoping to find some sign of Evelyn's life here. Some kind of explanation for why she had kept this house so meticulously while shutting herself away from the world. The study smelled of old books and ink, the walls lined with towering shelves. Heavy, dust-covered tomes filled them, some bound in cracked leather, others wrapped in cloth. The large mahogany desk at the center of the room was covered in neatly stacked papers, an old oil lamp resting beside them. Then I saw the journals. They were stacked in a corner, bound in black leather, each with a single date written on the spine. The earliest one was from 1953, the latest, the year of Evelyn's death. I hesitated before picking one up, the leather cold and smooth beneath my fingertips. Sophie stood beside me, peering at the book. "What is it?" she asked. "Aunt Evelyn's journal." I flipped it open to a random page. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, but the words chilled me. October 12th, 1977. The lady in black is pleased. I have done as she asked, and the shadows whisper approval. The bloodline is intact. The price will be paid in time. A cold shudder ran through me. I turned another page. August 3rd, 1985. Jonathan's parents refuse to return. They have severed their ties to Ravencrest, but it does not matter. The promise remains, passed through the blood. One day he will come back. One day he will understand. I slammed the journal shut, my pulse hammering. Sophie frowned. "What does it mean?" I didn't know how to answer. I set the book back on the desk and forced a smile. "Just old stories. Let's find our rooms." But the words burned in my mind. One day he will come back. One day he will understand. Had Evelyn known I would inherit the house? Had she known I would be forced to return? And more importantly, who was the lady in black? I set Sophie up in a room near mine, leaving a nightlight plugged into the wall at her request. The house was colder than it should have been, the chill seeping through the floors, settling into my bones. That night, I lay awake, listening. Somewhere in the house, I swore I heard humming, a soft, mournful tune drifting through the halls. A woman's voice, and then footsteps, light, hesitant, coming from Sophie's room. I bolted upright, heart pounding. I rushed to her door and threw it open. Sophie was sitting up in bed, wide-eyed, staring at the corner of the room. The shadows there were darker than they should have been, shifting unnaturally. "Sophie?" My voice came out strained. She turned to look at me. "She was here, Daddy." My blood ran cold. Who? The lady in black. My vision swam. I forced my feet to move, rushing to her side. "What did she do?" Sophie hesitated, gripping her stuffed rabbit. She just watched. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. "It's just a bad dream, sweetheart," I whispered, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Because in the corner where Sophie had been staring, the shadows still moved. I didn't sleep that night. Even after Sophie drifted off in my arms, I stayed awake, watching the shadows, listening for any sign that the woman might return. The house was silent again, but that silence felt like something holding its breath. By dawn, I was exhausted, but determined. I needed answers. Sophie was still sleeping when I carefully slipped out of her bed and made my way back to the study. The journals were still there, waiting. I grabbed the one from the year I was born, 1987, and flipped through the pages. March 17th, 1987. He is here, the boy. The bloodline continues, strong and unbroken. The lady in black is pleased. She watches him even now in the cradle, whispering to him in the night. He will belong to her in time. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I kept reading, turning pages feverishly, searching for anything that would explain what Evelyn had done. I found the answers deeper in the journal. November 2nd, 1991. They took him away. Jonathan's parents refused to return, refused to honor the agreement. The lady in black is displeased. She whispers that there will be consequences, that the cycle must be completed. December 14th, 1991. She is angry. She moves through the house at night, calling for him. I try to reason with her, but she is beyond reason. She is a force of nature, old and endless. She has waited too long. She will not wait forever. A cycle, a bargain, some agreement my family had abandoned, but one Evelyn had upheld. A chill ran down my spine. I had to keep reading. I grabbed the last journal, 2023, the year Evelyn had died. The last entry was dated the night she passed. September 9th, 2023. I am dying. The lady in black knows. She whispers in the dark, reminding me that my time is ending, but the promise remains. The house will pass to him. Jonathan will come. The choice will be made. It is inescapable. The cycle continues. My hands shook as I slammed the book shut. I had never believed in fate, but this wasn't coincidence. I had been meant to return, and whatever the lady in black wanted, she would come for it soon. Sophie was still asleep when I returned to her room. She looked so small beneath the blankets, her rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. I stood there, watching her, my mind reeling. Had Evelyn planned this all along? Had she really sacrificed our family to that thing? I didn't have time to sit with the horror of that realization. The lady in black wasn't done with us yet, and I had to figure out how to break this cycle before she took my daughter. I had spent as little time as possible in Ravencrest's basement since arriving. Even before I knew the truth, something about it had unsettled me. The air was always colder down there, heavier, like something was pressing down on you. I had avoided it, but now I had no choice. I needed to see what Evelyn had been doing in this house all these years. I waited until the sun was high in the sky when the house felt safest, before I made my way downstairs. The basement door groaned as I pushed it open. A rush of stale, freezing air met me, carrying the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic, blood. My hands trembled as I switched on the light and descended the wooden stairs. The basement looked normal at first, just rows of old boxes, furniture draped in white sheets, a wine rack filled with bottles so dusty the labels had faded. But then I saw the far end of the room. A wooden door, different from the others, older. Something in my gut twisted. I knew what I would find behind it before I even turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a small stone chamber beyond. Candles lined the walls, melted into thick pools of wax on the floor. Symbols had been drawn onto the stone in what I was terrified to realize was dried blood. In the center of the room stood an altar, and on that altar sat a black book. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave, to pretend I had never seen any of this. But I had to know. I stepped forward, hesitantly lifting the book. The cover was smooth, too smooth. Leather stretched over something that shifted beneath my fingers like it was breathing. I swallowed hard and opened it. The pages were filled with tight, spidery handwriting. Evelyn's handwriting. It was a grimoire, a spell book. And as I read, the full weight of what she had done crashed down on me. Evelyn's journal wasn't just a record of her thoughts. It was a blueprint for everything that had happened to us. She had detailed every ritual, every twisted bargain she had made with the lady in black. The entries spanned decades. April 3rd, 1965. She speaks to me in dreams now. The lady, the watcher, the keeper of shadows. She whispers secrets that no mortal should know, and yet I understand. I am honored. My family has been chosen for something greater. June 17th, 1972. I have found the proper incantation. The blood must be fresh, the wax blackened with ash from the hearth. The sacrifice need not die, only suffer. Pain is the key. Pain binds the soul. September 12th, 1988. My body fails me. I am old, weakened. The lady grows impatient. She requires a final gift, a perfect offering. I cannot give it to her. Not yet. But my time is short. I must ensure the legacy continues. Jonathan must understand. He must accept his role. I nearly dropped the book. My stomach twisted violently as I skimmed through the later entries. Evelyn had spent her entire life preparing for this. She had manipulated everything, including me. The last pages were the worst. January 6, 2001. Anna is perfect. She will make a fine addition to the family. Jonathan will love her, and in time, he will bring forth the true gift, the child, the girl. October 31st, 2022. The accident is prepared. The whispers have been placed in the driver's mind. He will drink, he will turn the wheel, and she will die. The lady will be pleased. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Evelyn orchestrated Anna's death. She planned all of it. For decades, she had fed the lady in black scraps of blood and suffering, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The entity wanted permanence. She wanted a family. That's why Evelyn had arranged for me to inherit Ravencrest. That's why she had set her sights on Sophie. A soul for a soul. A child for a mother. I clenched the book so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath came in ragged gasps. The house felt like it was closing in around me, the shadows stretching and writhing. Evelyn had spent her life bending to the lady's will. I refused to do the same. I had to find a way to break this. I had to end it. Sophie stirred in her sleep as I closed the journal. I ran a trembling hand over my face, my thoughts racing. How could I fight something that had controlled my family for generations? I glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. 3:47 a.m. The night was almost over. I needed to act now. The house was alive around me. The walls creaked, the air grew heavy, and whispers coiled in the darkness like slithering things, waiting, watching. I tucked the journal under my arm and reached for the old iron poker near the fireplace. I wasn't sure what good it would do, but I needed something solid in my hands, something real. Then I turned toward the basement door. It was colder down there, colder than before. Frost spread across the floor like veins of ice, twisting toward the center of the room where the altar stood. Candles, long melted into gnarled stumps, surrounded the table where Evelyn had made her offerings. The walls were lined with old, yellowed pages. Some were brittle and torn, filled with symbols drawn in blood. Others contained incantations, lists of names, and strange, looping handwriting. I stepped closer, scanning the text, trying to understand. Some of the names had been crossed out. Jonathan Morgan, Anna Holloway Morgan, Sophie Morgan. My blood ran cold. Beneath Sophie's name was a single, ominous word. Final. A gust of icy wind howled through the basement, snuffing out the candles. The shadows twisted, moving in unnatural patterns. And then, a voice. Soft, lilting like silk sliding over bare skin. You shouldn't have come down here, Jonathan. I turned, gripping the fire poker tighter. The lady in black stood in the far corner, her form shifting, writhing like a living shadow. Her veil lifted slightly, revealing a mouth that was far too wide, filled with gleaming, inhuman teeth. You were never meant to see these things, she whispered. The air grew heavy, pressing against my lungs like an unseen weight. But I suppose it was inevitable. You always were a curious child, just like Evelyn. The shadows lengthened, creeping toward me. I forced myself to stay still. I couldn't show fear. You manipulated her, I said, my voice hoarse. You spent decades whispering in her ear, twisting her into your servant. She came to me willingly, the lady said. She understood what was required. She made sacrifices. She did what was necessary to preserve your bloodline. I shook my head. She murdered my wife. No, the lady purred. She offered her for something greater. The rage in my chest burned hotter than my fear. I clenched my fists. You won't have Sophie. The lady's smile widened, stretching beyond what was humanly possible. But she is already mine, Jonathan. The moment you stepped foot in this house, the moment you accepted your inheritance, the bargain was sealed. I lifted Evelyn's journal, holding it up like a weapon. Then I'll break it, I snarled, and I threw it into the fireplace. The moment the flames touched the old, brittle pages, a scream tore through the house, not just from the lady in black, from the very walls, the floors, the foundation itself. The house shook violently, dust and plaster raining from the ceiling. The shadows recoiled, writhing in agony. The symbols on the walls burned, peeling away like dying embers. The lady in black lurched forward, but I swung the fire poker, catching her across the veil. She shrieked, staggering back as the fire consumed the journal. The names blackened and curled into ash, and with them, the hold she had over us. The house began to collapse around me. I turned and ran. Sophie was awake when I reached her room. She sat up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide but calm. Daddy, she whispered. She's angry. I know, sweetheart, I said, scooping her into my arms, but we're leaving, now. We bolted down the stairs as the walls buckled, the wood groaning like a dying beast. The front door ripped open on its own, and for the first time since arriving, I saw the outside world beyond the threshold. We sprinted into the yard just as the house gave one final, shuddering breath. And then, it was over. Dawn painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The air was still, no longer heavy with unseen eyes. I turned back to look at Ravencrest, or what was left of it. The house still stood, but it was different. The menacing aura was gone. The windows no longer seemed like hollow, watching eyes. The structure itself looked lighter, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally set it free. Sophie wiggled in my arms, and I set her down. She turned back toward the ruins of the house, holding out her rabbit. Goodbye, lady, she said softly. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, and for the first time I thought I heard a different kind of whisper. Not a threat, not a lure, just a gentle thank you. We didn't leave Ravencrest. Not entirely. The house had changed, and so had we. There was no longer anything keeping us there against our will. We renamed it Haven's Rest, a sanctuary rather than a prison. Evelyn's dark legacy had ended with us, and as the years passed, the whispers never returned. Only the lullaby remained. A soft, distant hum like a mother singing to a child who had been lost for too long. A song of release, a song of peace.